Hi, welcome to Plato's Cave, your speakeasy for ideas, where Tom and Dave show us how to think like the American founders. Grab a drink if you'd like. The conversation about saving our republic is about to begin.
Dave, I joined a club. I actually thought I would join a long time ago, but I just joined it.
Did it cost you a lot?
No, it didn't cost me anything. I am now part of the Facebook jail community.
Uh-oh. Did you say something mean to somebody?
Yeah. So it's interesting. Let's see. My Facebook account was created. Actually, it was my old friend and colleague, Glenn Miller, set up my Facebook account in 2013. He kept telling me, Crandall, you got to get engaged in the world of social media. So I begrudgingly, went into it, and then found I kind of liked it. That was in 2000. So 9 years I've been, posting on social media, primarily on Facebook. I like Facebook because there's no word limit, character limit like there is on Twitter, and and people who follow my page know it's kind of an intellectual salon. I mean, I will throw out a lot of my posts are little mini essays, and I've always been quite proud of this, that for the most part, with very few exceptions, it's a very intelligent, robust, vigorous discussion that goes on. And many of my posts will have many dozens or hundreds of comments. Sometimes they get shared a lot. But Facebook has put a restriction on my account.
Uh-oh. What'd you say?
Well, and it's really interesting. So I had written a post. It's still up there. It's on my Facebook page about pointing out that while it certainly was a bad, terrible, unjust thing that Westerners and Europeans were purchasing slaves from Africa, I point out it's also really bad. In fact, I would argue even worse, that Africans were violently kidnapping and enslaving fellow Africans. That's how they came to be slaves.
These were essentially warlords, right?
Yeah.
We're not just talking like some random African was walking down the street and said, "Hey, you look like you'd make a good slave.
Yes.
I'm gonna go grab you." These were warlords who were going and invading other tribes, and
there were entire tribes, African tribes, that specialized in kidnapping, kidnapping human beings, and enslaving those people and then selling them in these very elaborate slave markets on the west coast of Africa. And my point was simply every African, there's about 12.5 million of them were sold into slavery and shipped across the ocean, 12.5 million over the course of 4 centuries.
Mm-hmm.
And of those 12.5 million Africans, every single one of them was a slave while they stood on African soil,
right,
before they ever boarded a boat or anything. And this fellow who I don't even know if he's a real person or if he is some troll. It doesn't really matter. He likes to engage and raise questions and disputes, and he was engaging this. He's a progressive. That should tell people pretty much what they need to know. What he really wants to do is say America is a terrible, shameful, awful place, and the rest of the world is pretty much innocent.
Mm-hmm.
He doesn't want to acknowledge that Africans have any responsibility for the enslavement of 12.5 million Africans.
Right.
And here's where I got in trouble. I was making the point of, well, when you're the one doing the kidnapping, you have a lot of responsibility. And so I wrote up a little hypothetical. I said, imagine if I stalk someone and wait in the shadows, and when they walk out of their house, I hit them in the head with a pipe and bind them up with ropes and chains and put them in the trunk of my car, and then I take them to an underground black market where you can sell human beings, and I sell them. I said, I'm responsible for that. The police are going to come rightfully arrest me for that. I'm responsible. That comment is what got me restricted. I used no curse words, no obscenities. I didn't threaten anyone. I was describing this hypothetical situation to help this fellow understand that when you go kidnap and enslave people, you're responsible for that. Yes, Europeans and people in North America and South America, they have a lot of culpability because they were purchasing slaves. There's no doubt about it. I'm not denying that or downplaying that. I'm just pointing out those Africans who were doing the enslaving, they had a lot of responsibility too. And Facebook said that's against our community standards.
You know, I'm surprised because you and I have had this conversation before, and we've taken it a step further that you didn't take it in. And to me, it was that next step that really would have shaken the minds of people at Facebook when we talk about that African slave trade, right? And these Africans going in and kidnapping other Africans and then selling them when the United States stopped the African slave trade, when they said no, the Atlantic slave trade, no more. We are not going to have any more slaves being shipped and imported into the United States.
Right.
It's not like it stopped.
Right.
It's not like these African tribes said, well, we're done. We can't ship to the United States anymore, because the United States was far from the only place that they were shipping slaves.
Right.
They were shipping slaves to other parts of Europe, and they were also shipping slaves across the Atlantic to the Caribbean and then to South America quite a bit. Brazil in particular.
Single biggest recipient of African slaves.
Which happened to be controlled by European governments, by European monarchies at the time.
Yeah.
So you had these African tribal leaders acting as old school lobbyists.
Yes.
Going to these kings.
Yes.
i.e. bureaucrats, right?
Yes.
There's very little difference between a king who says, I'm in charge and whatever I say goes, and a bureaucrat who says, yeah, you can't do anything about me. I'm here, my job exists, and I get to make the rules. You had lobbyists going to bureaucrats, tribal leaders going to kings or to kings.
Let's make this real clear, Dave. Africans going to Europe.
Right. And saying, we know the United States has stopped the Atlantic slave trade, but and we know that you in the United Kingdom, you're starting to move into a direction of, I mean,
right.
What year did slavery end in Britain itself, in the United Kingdom itself?
Slavery, the practice of slavery, was outlawed in 1833.
Okay. So everybody likes to make the argument that, well, see, the UK did it. This guy, Mark, on Facebook probably would say, see, the UK did it before the United States did, so therefore they're better than us.
Yeah.
Well, they did it in the United Kingdom. But these lobbyists certainly got their hands on, they influenced the monarch and said, hey, we know you're stopping it here, but will you let us keep shipping down to Brazil? Will you let us keep shipping these slaves down to South America, to the Caribbean, to Central America? And we continued to have this Atlantic slave trade even after the United States said no more.
Your comments actually remind me of a wonderful book I've not looked at in a long time. I used it in one of the first courses I ever taught as a college professor. It's a book by Dinesh D'Souza, one of his earlier books. Actually, I think this was the second book he ever wrote and published, titled The End of Racism.
Okay.
And it is a beautiful book. It is a very academic book. He wrote that as an academic sort of historical study. And he has a lengthy section in there where he describes and he's citing original sources throughout all this. A couple of different instances. One, he's describing European Christian evangelists who are traveling through Africa. They're trying to proselytize Africans, turn them into Christians. And they're meeting with these tribal chiefs, and they're sitting down and having dinners and, doing the tribal rituals. And these European evangelists recorded in their diary, when they would get to the subject of slavery, they were trying to talk to these Africans, saying, now slavery is wrong, of course, and you really should get rid of it. And these Africans were completely bewildered. They had no idea what they would look at him. The one made a comment, when a dog is confused and he kind of tilts his head like that, right? That they were like, what do you mean it's wrong? From their point of view, it's like saying gravity is wrong and you should get rid of it. Like that, slavery is just the way of the world. And really the only option is, are you going to be a master or are you going to be a slave?
Right.
But the idea that you could get rid of slavery was unthinkable. In that same book, Dinesh also has a long section where he describes the story you're talking about, these tribal chiefs, the Dohimi from the Ghana. They travel to Paris, they travel to London, and they meet with government officials, lobbying them to keep the slave trade open, because for many of these African tribes that specialized in slavery, it was great business. It was the best business that hit the west coast of Africa in centuries.
Sure. Well, and it goes back to the idea that in a non-constitutional based society, and I don't say unconstitutional, I intentionally say non-constitutional because it's not like they had a constitution that they were violating. They were being unconstitutional.
Right.
They were a non-constitutional society.
Right.
There was no concept of private property. There was no concept of a government exists to protect private property. People could be property just like anything else. And your goal was to accumulate property in any form or fashion and then defend it or sell it to make your life better. And so everything in the world to these African tribes was looked at as this can be property as long as it can be sold.
Right.
And it goes back to sort of this foundational idea of what is capitalism, and this uniquely American idea that capitalism is morally good so long as private property and individual natural rights endowed by our creator were protected in that system.
And I think it's worth clarifying here. There's this pivotal moment in the Constitutional Convention, the summer of 1787. There they are in Philadelphia, and they're meeting for months, and it's hot and humid, and they're fighting all day, and then they go get drunk at night together and get up the next morning, start fighting again. The pivotal moment is when they're talking about whether or not slaves should be counted as part of the state's population. So a state like Georgia, South Carolina, large slave populations, they wanted to count their slaves. And James Madison makes a speech, and he says very explicitly that the whole problem with slavery is that it treats men, and when he says men, he means human beings, because there were female slaves too. And it treats human beings as if they're property. And he says this line: there can be no property in man.
Right.
To treat a human being as property is to misunderstand, it's to treat the thing, a thing that it's not. A human being can own property. A human being cannot rightfully be property.
Right.
And that is an idea that's at the centerpiece of the American founding, this notion that we human beings, we can rightfully own property. We can't be property, which is what makes slavery a huge problem, because the whole idea of slavery is treating human beings as if they're property. And that's what launches this great abolition movement to get rid of it. But it's also the point, as long as we don't have laws that do treat other human beings as property, and we respect each other's property rights, that's a beautiful thing. It means whatever is rightfully mine, my money, my house, whatever it is, whatever's mine, my liberty, my person, you and the law respects that, and I respect your property, whatever is rightfully yours. That's the foundation of a really truly free and prosperous nation.
So that brings us into an interesting conversation. When you take that fundamental idea and you add to it the ideas of capitalism, this idea of free trade and free exchange, free from government intrusion, we could start now having this interesting conversation about what is going on in our markets today. A few weeks ago, we talked about whether or not the United States today was more like the American founding or more like Russia. And, and it brings us to that conversation of when you look at the bureaucracy and you look at the involvement and the cronyism that happens within the bureaucracy.
Yeah.
Where do we stand in terms of the ideas of basic free markets and the basic exchange of goods, that I have a piece of property that you want to buy and you're willing to pay me something that I'm willing to take for it? Should a company, or should an investor, or should an individual within that company be able to say, no, you can't sell your share. No, you can't be a part of your thing. You can't sell your equity or your interest, or this person can't be a decision maker within that company strictly because one person out of a whole group doesn't want you to.
Yeah.
I think that lends itself really well to this conversation that we've been seeing in the market about Twitter, right? So you're seeing Elon Musk come in, and we've all, I think everybody has been following this, right? Elon Musk is stepping in and saying, I want to buy Twitter.
Dave, just in case anyone of our members has been living under a rock in recent years, just remind people, who Who is Elon Musk?
That must be a really big rock. Where do we begin? Elon Musk. I actually think a lot of people don't really understand the whole history of Elon Musk. And maybe we should talk a little bit about going back to the beginning. Elon Musk was one of the co-founders of PayPal. Gosh, this must have been mid-90s, early to mid-90s. He created PayPal, this first platform to exchange currency, exchange money digitally without having to use your bank, right? Where you can connect your credit card or your bank account and anybody can accept a credit card. Anybody can trade money back and forth. And there were about 13 guys involved in PayPal. And I think listing some of them is interesting. One in particular was his brother, Kimball Musk, who's now a restaurateur here in Colorado. I've met Kimball several times. He's a very interesting guy. When they sold PayPal, Elon decided to go the engineering route. Kimball decided to go to culinary school and has opened restaurants. But outside of them, they had guys like Peter Thiel. For those who don't remember the 2016 Republican National Convention, for all of the pushback that Donald Trump has gotten as being anti-LGBTQ and anti-everything else, he brought Peter Thiel to the RNC, and Peter Thiel was up on stage speaking. Peter Thiel is a gay man. So for all of the talk of Donald Trump was responsible for the very first gay Republican to have a platform to speak at the RNC. On top of that, Peter Thiel is was one of the premier venture capital investors in Silicon Valley until about 4 years ago, right after that speech. He just began getting death threats and hate, and nobody wanted to work with him and nobody wanted to talk to him. That might have been exaggerated a little bit, but he realized the market there was done, and there was no reason for him to stay in Silicon Valley. He moved, for some reason stayed in California. He moved to Los Angeles and is still doing venture capital in very big ways. He just decided there's no point in him being in Silicon Valley anymore. In addition to Peter Thiel were Ben Horowitz and Marc Andreessen. For those who are using our website now and our mobile app now, you might have seen in the forums section under great books, under our reading section I posted a comment from Marc Andreessen on Twitter, from Twitter the other day, as we get into Twitter. Marc Andreessen posted a friend's post of 20 books that everybody should read in their 20s. Now, I think a lot of our members, myself included, haven't read most of these books. Some of them didn't come out when I was in my 20s or when we were in our 20s, but they're still worth reading. He actually said, though, I think only 7 of these are worth reading, but wouldn't say which 7 they were. So I posed the question, who's read these and which of these do you think are worth reading that you think Andreessen would say? And if anybody wants to go participate in that conversation, there's actually been a lot of comments. It's been a fun conversation
in the
to participate.
section of the website or the app.
Correct. So Marc Andreessen is slowly starting to allow people to know he is a conservative. Marc Andreessen just kept quiet and for years just kept himself silent and just went about his investment businesses. His business partner was Ben Horowitz. For those who have been following the movement, Ben Horowitz's father is David Horowitz, who is the head of the David Horowitz Freedom Center. They run websites like frontpagemag.com, Jihad Watch, and a few others.
Interesting guy himself, former radical leftist, violent radical leftist in the 60s, was running with the Black Panthers and groups like that, and made a sharp break in the early 90s and really became a conservative.
And is actually working closely with a former friend of yours. Shouldn't say a former friend, but a friend from parts of your past life.
My Claremont days.
From your Claremont days, who's still a friend, but it is one of Horowitz's top advisors and business managers.
So you just gave me way more biographical background than I was.
But I did this for a reason, because I think this is all going to play into the Musk conversation. So those guys, along with Musk and a few others, became known as the PayPal Mafia. You could basically trace every billion-dollar company in the history of Silicon Valley back to one of these or more than one of these 13 guys,
Okay.
including Facebook and Twitter. Facebook and Twitter, if you go, for those who saw the movie The Social Network, there's this scene where Jesse Eisenberg playing Mark Zuckerberg goes into the office of an investor wearing his pajamas. And he's saying, you want me so bad, I don't even have to dress up for you. It's a bit of a stretch and everything else, but the three investors in the room were Peter Thiel, Ben Horowitz, and Mark Andreessen. And so I laid those out because I wanted people to see the extent to which these people have been involved. Elon Musk basically launches all of what we know as Silicon Valley today through the creation of PayPal. The guys he made multi-millionaires or 100 millionaires in the mid-90s who ended up investing in other companies, so on and so forth, who are now worth billions. Elon Musk himself worth, what, $220 billion in cash and assets, all started out of PayPal. Elon Musk took that money. He has now built companies like Solar City, which is becoming one of the leading companies in the solar energy development movement. He has built Tesla, obviously, that we all know, becoming sort of the first major electric car company, and also
says he's going to Mars.
Right. And that was going to be my next thing. He started SpaceX, which is the first company to be able to take off and land a rocket, right? Yeah. We usually take off our rockets, they parachute back down and they're not usable again.
Yeah.
He is launching space shuttles into the sky, and then the rockets that launch them are coming back down to land, and they're landing on little platforms hardly bigger than this table in the middle of the ocean, which is just incredible to me. But the point is that Elon Musk has been doing things that people have been saying is impossible time and time again. And you watch these videos of him, these interviews of him over the years, and I'm not even just talking about today as a guy who's the wealthiest man on the planet. Elon Musk is a true capitalist in that he understands that his only purpose is to create things that people value, create things that change the world, that can create value for other people. And when he does that, the money just follows. It's not about creating something that he has to figure out, okay, I have to convince this politician to do this for me and this politician to do that for me. He is actually trying to build value. Now, that's not to say he hasn't taken advantage of government benefits over the years. We all know he has, but that's sort of the game we're living in right now. And if you follow him closely enough, if all of the government benefits for car companies weren't there and the government wasn't paying off GM and Ford and Chrysler and all of these companies when the market was crashing in 2007, and they also weren't helping electric vehicles, Musk still would have started Tesla. There's no doubt about it. He still would have done this because he thinks it's the right path to go from a value standpoint.
I just want to remind people here, what you're talking about right now, this notion of wealth creation, within the Academy section of our website or on our app. We have a seminar on wealth creation. And for our members, if you haven't checked it out, I really encourage you to do so. It has some very well produced little videos, and they're short. They're 3-4 minutes each. And there's a section in there where we really emphasize the difference between money versus wealth, real wealth. You know, money's a form of currency. It can be created, it can be inflated, deflated, all these things. But genuine wealth is whatever other people value, doing something, making something, having something that other people value. When you can create something that other people want, that other people are willing to pay for or trade for, you're creating wealth for yourself. And one of the things and clearly Elon Musk figured this out. Don't be thinking about the dollars. Be thinking about what is it other people appreciate.
Right.
What do other people want? What do they need? And figure out how to deliver and produce that. And one of the things we show in that seminar is wealth creation. The very concept of wealth is one of the most beautiful ideas ever discovered by the human mind, because for me to get wealthy means I have to, unless I, steal or engage in some injustice. But if I want to get wealthy and be an honest, decent person, the way to do it is help other people, create value for other people,
Yeah.
do things that other people value. And Elon Musk has clearly figured that out.
And I think what has made people on the left so uncomfortable with his potential purchase of Twitter, and I want to get into that more deeply in a minute and what that looks like and what the problems are and everything else. But just in general, the thing that has made people so uncomfortable on the left is that he hasn't actually come out and said, here's how I'm going to make Twitter successful.
Right.
Here, Twitter has been, let's be honest, Twitter has been an abject failure as a business. Twitter lost money again last year. They have never had a fully profitable year. They've had a few profitable quarters, but I think they were 7 or 8 years in post-launch before they ever turned a profitable quarter.
Mm-hmm.
Yet this company is being valued at billions of dollars for a company that isn't making a profit, which is a whole other weird conversation that we could have today. But the problem becomes Musk is not sitting there and saying, I'm going to make Twitter successful. Here's my business model. Here's my proposal of what I want to do with it. All he's saying is, I think people value open dialogue. I think people value the freedom to speak and freedom to say what they want without thinking that, oh, because I believe this politically or because I believe that politically, because I make a comparison or I make an analogy that talks about what it would be like to kidnap somebody as a tribal African warlord.
Right.
All of a sudden, I'm going to get kicked off this platform. And you have that regulation, you have that control on it. We have people freaking out on the left because they just don't know what he's going to do with it.
Yeah. I think Musk is interesting. I think many progressives find him troubling because he's gone into their space. That's where he's kind of carved out a name for himself on the internet, things connected to social media. He's out there exploring the vastness of space. He kind of is part of their tribe culturally.
Yeah.
But he's also a big proponent of freedom. And all he has said about Twitter is, I'm going to make it an arena of freedom.
Right.
That's really it.
He's not saying I'm going to promote Donald Trump more than I'm going to promote Joe Biden or Hillary Clinton or anybody else.
Right.
It's simply he thinks that freedom is the best way to achieve what he's looking to achieve. And a lot of that has come out of what he's had to experience from a bureaucracy standpoint. I mean, remember the original version of the Build Back Better plan that Joe Biden introduced?
Yeah.
It's so hard to say that and not just lose
it is.
The initial part of that plan was Joe Biden and whoever his staff is wanted to give tax incentives to car manufacturers who were creating electronic vehicles, right? They wanted to incentivize. We talk all the time.
And who's the king of all that? Elon Musk, right? Tesla.
He was until Joe Biden came along and decided, I really want to push unions. We are now up to almost 50 states. We are like this close, and I don't know the exact number, 47, 48, 49, somewhere in there, of all 50 states being right to work states.
Right.
Which is a huge divergence from where we were when unions were the heart of this country.
Right.
And Joe Biden wants to return us to the unions being the heart of the country. So you know what they did in Build Back Better? He turned around and said, okay, we're going to continue to give tax incentives and other incentives and grants and other benefits to car manufacturers.
For electric cars.
Because we need to do that for climate change, for the climate crowd.
Yep.
But only if your car company uses union workers.
But by the way, we shouldn't let this pass. Think about what that's also saying. They have to subsidize the electric cars because even environmentally conscious progressives don't actually want to pay the price for an electric car. They're only going to buy an electric car if it's subsidized with taxpayer dollars. And then when government's looking around, okay, who we're going to send those subsidies to? Well, it's got to be union shops.
Right.
And Elon, this is what I meant in my comment that Elon Musk has sort of he's come to maturity. He's flourished culturally in the space of progressives, electric cars, right?
Right.
That's his world. He knows about electric cars. Progressives say electric cars are great, but Musk's company Tesla is not going to get those subsidies.
Yep.
Because he's not a union shop.
Because he won't and here's the funny thing. His employees don't want to unionize.
Right.
He takes such good care of them. We just saw this with
Oh, yeah.
Amazon too,
Yeah.
right? For as much as we don't like Jeff Bezos about a lot of things, Jeff Bezos allowed his employees to put it to a vote. He said, if you guys want to unionize, put it to a vote and we can talk about it. They voted no.
You mentioned how all these states have adopted these right to work laws, and this is a trend going now reaching back really about 25 years. And what's interesting, when states adopt these right to work laws, they don't outlaw unions. You can still, if you want to unionize, if you're free to unionize. It just means you can't compel someone to be in a union. That's the way the unions used to get their membership. Is they actually had laws that would compel someone. You want to work in a certain industry, you had to have a union card. And what's happening with that little taste of freedom, people go and get jobs and they're asked, do you want to be part of the union? And the vast majority of them say, no, heck no. I want the freedom to, I don't want to be stuck at a union wage. I want the freedom to excel and demonstrate, create value and hopefully earn more than what the union rate would be.
Well,
and so the only place in the United States, and this kind of comes back to your big theme here of crony corruption, the only place where unions still thrive are government unions.
right.
Public employee unions, because in many of those situations, you do have to be part of the union in order to work in that sector.
Well, so you just brought us to something really intrinsic to this whole conversation about Twitter and what's going on. And I don't know how many people actually have a full sense of what is happening at Twitter. What is Elon Musk asking for? What is the pushback? Why is there pushback? And how all of this is working together. And to me, maybe somebody else can prove this. Maybe somebody in our audience can actually go out and prove this. I'm confident in saying that most of what's happening behind the scenes within the board of Twitter is cronyism at its core. Let's kind of talk about what this whole deal looks like. Elon Musk comes in, buys 9% of Twitter, just over 9% of Twitter.
Right.
And they say, okay, we're going to put you on the board. And he says, okay. And he thinks I'm going to have a say in how this whole thing works. Interestingly, everybody else on the board combined. Now, this board seat was going to be Jack Dorsey's board seat. Jack Dorsey, for those who don't know, was the founder of Twitter. Jack Dorsey's an interesting case here because Jack Dorsey has not necessarily been a proponent of freedom.
Right.
At all. We've seen him in front of Congress. We've seen him go out in front of Congress looking ridiculous with his nose rings and T-shirts and everything else, not even caring about anything in the world, and then just going and saying we're going to do whatever we want, which there's some legitimacy to.
Right.
But the board had asked Jack Dorsey to step down as CEO. They removed him as CEO 2 years ago. Which at a time, Pedrog, who they replaced him with, Elon Musk took a picture of Lenin, took a statue of Lenin and replaced the face of this.
John or Vladimir?
Vladimir.
Okay.
Replaced the face on the statue with the new CEO of Twitter. I mean, he flat out called him a fascist at the time. And he has been very strict about saying, I don't care about freedoms. We have our business is to control the conversation.
And I think, correct me if I'm wrong, Dorsey, I believe, owns something like maybe 2%, something like that.
He owns about 2.5%.
2.5%. But that's huge. His 2.5% is huge compared to the rest of the board members, many of whom own either nothing at all or tiny little like fractions of a percent.
I think if you add up all of the I haven't done the exact math, but just looking at the list that I was looking at it yesterday, if you take Dorsey off, which Dorsey's leaving the board at the end of the quarter.
Okay.
So Dorsey's leaving the board. Dorsey's also the CEO of Square, for those who know the credit card processing software. So once he leaves, the remainder of the board will own less than 0.25%.
Wow.
of the entire company.
Right.
These are not people who have financial interest in the success of Twitter. They have other financial interests. And most of them, if not all of them, other than the current CEO of Twitter,
Mm-hmm.
most of them have major financial interest in other companies that they're a part of.
Right.
For example, there's a woman, I'm not even going to try to pronounce her last name. Her first name is Mimi.
All right.
She's on the board.
Let's just go with Mimi.
Mimi owns 0% of Twitter. She has 0.00% of Twitter.
Okay.
But she sits on the board. Her full-time job is as the senior vice president of public-private partnerships for MasterCard. So how does MasterCard work with the government to provide certain benefits?
I'm going to, for those in our audience who don't know what public-private relationships mean, that's just code for crony corruption.
Right.
That's what public-privateship always means. It's some business that teams up with some level of government for some kind of contract, subsidy, exemption, preferential treatment, something like that.
So we'll get back to where that plays into the cronyism. So if Elon Musk had joined the board,
Mhm.
think about that. He would have owned over 9%. I think it was about 9.2%.
Yeah.
So meaning he would have owned more than 9% more
Yeah.
of the company than every other
Combined.
board member combined.
Right.
Now, what he didn't realize until he got invited to the board and the paperwork was sent over to sign, the paperwork outlines that any board member is not allowed to own more than 14% of the company, 14.1% or 14.2%.
Right.
So he would have been capped at how much he could acquire, which immediately he said, nope, I'm not doing this. So it shows he had this interest in acquiring more of the company in the long run. So what does he do instead? He comes out and he says, I'm going to buy every share of Twitter. I want to make an offer. I want to buy it. I want to take it private. Right. Which isn't common, but it happens with companies. I want to take Twitter private and I will buy every share for $54.20. There's a little connection here. This is a total side note. Elon Musk has an obsession with the number 420. And for those who don't realize, 420 is a marijuana reference.
Yep. Every year, people who like to smoke marijuana, they have a big celebration on April 20th because April's the 4th. The date is 420,
which always had other implications to me. 420, April 20th is also the anniversary of the Columbine shooting.
Okay,
and is also Hitler's birthday. So there's this whole weird thing about 420 and marijuana and all these horrible things that have happened on April 20th.
I will also say I've never understood the connection to marijuana. If anybody in our audience wants to, enlighten me about that, I'd like to know. Well,
somebody once told me this, and I don't know if it's true or not, so somebody can confirm or deny this. Somebody once told me that was the police scanner code in California.
I think I've heard that too. Yes.
In the state of California, we have a 420 in progress, which was something
like
to do with a drug deal concerning marijuana.
Yeah.
So that was where the whole thing came from. Anyway, you have Elon Musk obsessed with this. He's also doing the Tesla quarterly earnings report.
Yeah.
For the end of quarter one happens on April 20th every year.
Okay.
So the 5420 was strategic in that he wanted 420 in the number. Yep. Just a little weird side note about Elon Musk. He's a little bit of a different kind of guy. Yeah. And we all saw him on Joe Rogan smoking pot that day, and that changed the whole thing. So Elon Musk comes along and Elon Musk says, I want to just buy the whole thing. And the board says no. The board says, absolutely not. We don't want to sell to you. The question becomes why. Now, it starts.
Was it let's just answer an obvious question. Was it a money? Was he offering too little? Was he offering like far less than what the shares are worth?
The problem becomes that's a subjective question.
Okay.
He was offering a 50% increase on what the current value of the shares were on the day he made the offer.
Okay.
The share price went up about $10 a share immediately following
his offer,
right? Because everybody knows, well, if it's sold for $54 and if I can go buy 50,000 shares at $44 and he buys it at $54, I make $10 a share. I just made $500,000.
But the point is because Twitter is a publicly traded company,
Right.
those shares were trading for around $44-ish.
Much less when he made the offer, close to mid-30s.
So he came in and said $54.
Right. Now the reason I say it's subjective is people look at the stock market as a long-term investment. What do they think Twitter is going to?
Right.
And the board of Twitter can make a legitimate argument about their fiduciary duty to say, well, the 52-week high in the last year, the high was about $75.
Okay.
So he's $20 a share less than our 52-week high. We think we can get back there. Therefore, he needs to offer more. Everybody who's following the market, everybody who's following the stock, even the Goldman Sachs and the JP Morgans, they do projections of what they think stocks are going to be worth. They were talking mid-30s. So he was still $20 a share higher than most of those projections. And you saw him actually tweeting the pictures of those projections from the Goldman Sachs website,
Right.
To Twitter, saying, hey, for anybody who thinks that this is worth $75, Goldman's telling you it's worth about 32. So don't tell me it's worth 75.
Yeah.
So it's subjective. It's up to a judge. You never know what a judge is going to say. We all know the risks of going to court and how that works. But for the most part, it's hard to say that wasn't a fair or more than fair offer. So Musk comes along, he offers $54.20, and the board says no. The board does not want to sell. And the question becomes why? The question becomes, what is it that the board is saying that they have this fiduciary duty? It's a risk to say no, because their shareholders could sue them saying, hey, I want that money.
Right.
You have a potential to sell for more. You have no other offers on the table. And as we talked about earlier, Twitter has been an abject failure in terms of its stock price since the day it went public. It has never grown. The subscriber growth has never grown to the levels that they projected it would. We've seen Facebook go to astronomical heights. Every other tech company, Apple, Facebook, Google, Amazon, they're just going to astronomical heights, and Twitter is still sitting there in the 30s. What's the difference? And it's because it's been poorly managed and poorly run. So for anybody who's invested in Twitter, they want this board gone. They have a desire for that board to be gone. If that's the case, why are they saying no? And this is where I will flat out say I believe, and like I said, if somebody can prove this, awesome.
Right.
I think it's cronyism. I think it's you have a lot of members of this board of directors like Mimi who have government relationships. And the other part of this that a lot of people don't realize is the majority of Twitter is owned by what are called institutional investors. So institutions mean Goldman Sachs, JP Morgan, Citibank, major hedge funds.
Not Dave and Tom as individuals.
Right. And if Dave and Tom are invested in Twitter, there might be a few. We own 100 shares. Right. We maybe have $4,000 in shares in Twitter. If we're lucky,
that would be something typical.
Right. There are over 750 million shares of Twitter trading on the market. An individual investor like you or I might own 400 or 100 or, we're not owning anything significant. It is significant that it's more than what the board of directors owns.
Yeah.
But it's fairly insignificant. These institutional investors make up 83 to 84% of the total ownership of Twitter. Now, you and I might be invested in Goldman Sachs, and Goldman Sachs is then investing some of our money into Twitter, but we don't end up getting a say on the board. It's Goldman Sachs voting on who the board members are.
I think I'm seeing a pattern here, though, Dave. So you have a board of directors who those board members as individuals have all kinds of crony government interests, like Miss Mimi, who works for MasterCard, which is a heavily regulated, that's a major credit card company. This is one of the most regulated industries in the world, which is, and I'm going to make this point now, and I think I'm going to repeat this later in this podcast. It's so important. Where you have heavily regulated industries, you end up with very few businesses in those industries. You end up with a few, like in the credit card world. The reason is, if you and I, Dave, wanted to go start a credit card company, right? And
Yeah.
you're a smart business guy, and we could raise some capital and stuff. The regulatory costs would break us before we ever had one customer. We wouldn't even-
Without a doubt.
before we ever printed one little plastic card, we couldn't get there. And so you have this board that of individuals who work for businesses that are deeply connected to government, have
Mhm.
deep government connections. Mimi's interests and MasterCard's interests are to make sure everyone in the government, their regulators, are happy.
Right.
And now you have these institutional investors, these big financial firms, which are also heavily regulated.
Right.
People at Goldman Sachs, they know the actual employees who work at the SEC.
Mm-hmm.
In fact, I promise you, there are employees at the SEC right now who used to work at Goldman Sachs,
And vice versa.
and there are people who are employees at Goldman Sachs who used to work at the SEC. And so there's this very clear, the pattern here that we're seeing is deep government involvement. And I think what you might be suggesting is something terrible. You might be suggesting that all these people connected to Twitter, investors in Twitter, board members on Twitter, they might want to be using Twitter as a political tool to help their friends in government.
Well, let's take it even a step further.
Okay.
You said something earlier about public employee unions.
Yeah.
Public employee unions have pensions, every single one of them, right? If you work, I don't care if you're in the teachers union,
Yep,
or the fire union,
yep,
or the firefighters union, or the police union, or any other government bureaucracy.
There's there are several big federal unions,
Federal
for
employee
all
unions,
federal employees.
right?
Yeah.
Those unions have pensions.
Yeah.
Those pension funds are managed by Goldman Sachs or JP Morgan or Citibank or similar types of banks like that. So all of a sudden now you have these employee unions that we've talked about are funneling money. They are laundering money for these politicians.
Yes, they are.
Making up huge portions of the investment capital that Goldman Sachs and JP Morgan and Citibank and the like have to go invest in third party, in Twitter and Facebook and everything else. So all of a sudden, if Goldman Sachs is a major investor in Twitter and they have an interest in protecting the National Teachers Union that we've been talking about so much, the teachers union can come along and say, hey, Goldman, you have control over what's said on Twitter, right? So this is part of the government. This is part of the bureaucracy, these teachers unions. You have control over the board at Twitter. We want you to make sure that nothing that's going against the teachers union is being talked about on Twitter. Or
basically here, I just want to make a very simple political statement.
Sure.
In other words, the interest is, hey, Goldman Sachs, go silence conservatives to the best you can.
Yeah.
Go silence them. Use those platforms to silence. And here we get into some really murky, messy grounds. And you know, you and I have talked about this before. I mean, these are complicated subjects precisely because there's not a clear line between the proper sphere of government, the proper role of government, and private property.
Right.
In a case like Twitter, in one sense, yes, it is a private, well, it's a publicly owned, but it's still a company. It's a business.
Right.
That is private property. At the same time, the major players in Twitter, major investors, board members, board of directors, are deeply, deeply engaged in crony government relationships.
Right.
And so here we find government coming kind of through the back end. It's not like Congress is passing a law saying, you Twitter silence conservative. That's not a law that Congress passes.
Mm-hmm.
It's a very indirect way. You have to trace all these connections from these government agencies and programs to these investors, right, to a company like Twitter.
Well, and that brings us to this fundamental idea of what is being said in the public domain, what is being said publicly right now about this whole deal by both sides.
Yeah.
We need to make sure that we are accurate in how we discuss this. And you said it. Congress isn't going and passing a law. That's why they have bureaucracy. So they don't have to go pass a law
Right.
that somebody can come along and say, I can't believe you would pass that. I'm not reelecting you.
Right.
You're done. You're gone. No, they use bureaucracy to create rules and regulations that keep them out of the responsibility, that keep the responsibility away from them. So what happens is now Congress hasn't passed a law. Therefore, there really hasn't been a violation of freedom of speech. And we are talking quite a bit right now that there's a lot of people saying Elon Musk is going to save freedom of speech if he buys Twitter. It's really not that, because freedom of speech was designed to keep Congress from creating laws that prevent us from talking, that prevent us from saying certain things and will imprison or kill us for saying things that we shouldn't be talking about.
I'm going to use an analogy here that might kind of help make it clear. Your home is your property. That's your private property. And therefore you do get to decide what kind of speech is allowed, what you allow. If someone is saying things you don't like, you'll kick them out of your house and not invite them back. So what you allow, when I come visit your house, what you allow me to say and what you don't, I might start saying something. You might say, Tom, that's way out of bounds. I don't like you talking that way. Don't talk that way here in my house.
Right.
Well, then my choice is I either stop talking, right, or leave.
Right.
But either way, when we're standing in your living room and you say, Tom, I don't want you talking that way in my house, you have not violated my First Amendment rights.
Mm-hmm.
I am still free to say whatever I want to say. I just can't say it in your house.
Right.
I can leave your house. I can go stand on the street corner. I can go stand in my own house and say anything that I want to say. It's just that you don't want it being said in your house. And therefore, it really is a mistake to talk about these social media platforms in terms of First Amendment. So it really has nothing to do with the First Amendment. The First Amendment, for those who don't remember, it's very clear. It says, Congress shall make no law abridging the freedom of speech.
Right.
There it is. That's the relevant part of the First Amendment. It's a limitation on Congress. So when Twitter says you violated our standards, or when Facebook restricts my account, they say, Crandall Whitter, you violated our standards. I'm not even sure how I did that or what those standards are. Regardless, that's not Congress. That's not Congress passing a law abridging my freedom of speech. No one's putting me in jail. No one's charging me with a crime, right? There is no prosecutor involved or cops or courts or jails. This is just Facebook saying, if you want to post on our platform, we have these rules and you violated and we're going to restrict your account. And so I do agree with you in this sense. It is a mistake to talk about writing freely or not on social media as a First Amendment subject. It doesn't have anything to do with the First Amendment.
Now, that said, and you're going to have to remind me, one of the framers, one of the founders, talked about the ability to speak truth and the ability for the free exchange of conversation is the biggest enemy of fake news, so to speak.
Oh, you're thinking of Thomas Jefferson.
What was the quote or what was the conversation?
He said, truth is great and will prevail as long as she has her natural weapons, which is free speech and open debate.
Right.
Those are the natural weapons for truth.
And it's the open debate that I think we need to be advocating for on Twitter, right? Twitter, what Musk is doing is Musk is fighting for the ability to discover truth, which to me, I would argue is so much more important than freedom of speech, right? Freedom of speech in terms of it's important in that we should be able to criticize our government freely without worrying about being murdered or going to jail.
Well, and I want to emphasize here, that's really important. When the founders talked about freedom of speech, that was foremost what was on their mind. Political speech. They thought that was the most important kind of speech. Not so much, having a rant and telling your neighbor how much you hate them.
Right.
I mean, maybe you do hate your neighbor and you want to rant. That's not what they were thinking about. The free speech that was most important to them was speech that was critical of their government.
And I think today, I'm not saying we're not getting there, and I'm not saying that is a potential threat in the future, but we don't live in a country today where either side, all the leftists who want to claim that Donald Trump is a fascist and all of these things, and January 6th was an act of fascism and anti-democracy, forget all of it. But there is nobody, I believe, in the country who is effectively or actually influencing an opinion that anybody who speaks negatively about our government, who speaks negatively. Now, the January 6th incident, the fact that they've put some people behind bars and actually without any due process, without any, that's a major constitutional violation. But there's nobody out there saying, anybody who stands up, if I say on this podcast that I think our government is acting inappropriately, and I think I could even make an argument that several members of our government should be impeached for some of the things that they're doing. There's nobody coming and knocking on our door saying, Dave, you just said that, you're going to prison.
Right.
That's not happening yet. The best way to prevent that is for truth to prevail. The best way to prevent that is to not keep truth in the shadows, to get out of the cave. We're doing this, right? This is Plato's cave. This is all about get out of the cave, get truth to prevail. And when truth prevails, we still won't have to worry about that. So for me, it's a more important fight to fight for truth, to fight to expose truth to the world than it is to continue to fight this idea of, well, that's a First Amendment violation, and the First Amendment gives me this right. Nobody's giving you the right. You have that naturally.
Right.
We just have to continue to protect it. So the whole thing with Musk is I believe he is an advocate for truth more than he is an advocate for freedom of speech.
Well, and here the conversation has taken an interesting turn. Two big concepts, truth and free speech. Now, I'm going to propose something, Dave, because we're getting close to our time limit here.
Sure.
I think this is probably worth picking up and continuing a conversation about the relationship between free speech. What did the founders mean by it? Does it mean anybody is free to say anything they want, anytime they want? And its relationship to truth.
You know, and as we do that, there's probably a conversation in there about natural rights as well, and tying that whole thing together. And for those who didn't catch it, you were on the radio just a week or so earlier last week.
Yeah, with my friend Ross Kaminsky.
With Ross talking about Justice Brown Jackson saying, I don't know if there's such a thing as natural rights, and all of that is tied in together in our pursuit of truth.
Absolutely.
So that I look forward to talking about that next week. I think we just
sketched out our next podcast, Dave.
I look forward to talking about that next week.
Until then, we're going to keep guarding the American idea. We're going to keep guarding the truth, and we're going to keep guarding the freedom to speak, the right to speak freely in the pursuit of truth.
Nos somos custodes.